Hello, and welcome to this webcast, Constant Contract, Integrating Contracts with Business Process to Operationalize Compliance Performance, brought to you by the Institute for Supply Management, and sponsored by Zycus. I'm your moderator, Nora Niebergall. Thanks for joining us. Before we begin, we wanted to cover a few administrative items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets that you can use during the program. If you have any questions during the webcast, please click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. We will try to answer these during the webcast, but if a more complicated or complete answer is required, or if we run out of time, it will be answered later through email. We do capture all questions. If you would like a copy of today's slide deck, it's available in the Resource List widget that looks like a green folder at the bottom of your screen. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the Maximize icon at the top right of the slide area, or by dragging the bottom right corner of the slide area. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical issues. So let's turn to today's program. Today's presenters are Richard Waugh. Richard has an extensive background in B2B e-commerce. He helped launch GE's Trading Process Network, TPN, the first online marketplace for sourcing and procurement. He was also co-founder of B2E Markets, one of the first software-as-a-service sourcing suite providers, and later covered the supply management market as an industry analyst for Aberdeen Group. We also have Ryan Walicki. Ryan is responsible for sustaining and growing NITOR's presence in North America, as well as working closely with clients to assist them in achieving their objectives. His experience in spend management at various levels of management provides a 360-degree view into spend management strategy and execution. Prior to joining the NITOR team, Ryan led procurement teams at various points along their respective spend management journeys with a focus on strategy, sourcing, and technology platform consulting. Finally, Anders Lillevek. Anders is the Global Head of Procurement Support Services for QBE Insurance, a world-leading insurance holding company listed on ACX with annual revenues of $16 billion. He is currently based in Atlanta, Georgia. In his role, he's responsible for the strategic direction and execution of the procurement infrastructure, procurement operations, supplier relationship management, and procurement reporting activities across the company. So we really love having all these speakers with us today. Today's seminar is going to cover the following points: assessing baseline contract management capabilities and gaps, developing and implementing contract lifecycle management, defining and exploiting strategic contract data analytics, creating 360-degree transparency from sourcing to contract and ultimately payment, and proactively and preemptively managing enterprise-wide compliance and accountability. I'm going to hand today's program over to Richard. Take it away, Richard.
Well, thanks so much, Nora. Pleasure to join you today, and also pleased to be joined by my esteemed colleagues, Ryan and Anders, for our presentation. You've given us a great overview of the synopsis for the session today. I just wanted to walk through briefly kind of a more detailed agenda of what we intend to cover. We've got the introductions out of the way. I'm going to hand off to Ryan, our partner from NITOR Partners, who's going to initiate our discussion today, first with some definitions. What do we mean when we say contract compliance? Some context. Why is contract compliance important? And then be able to help in sort of putting together the benefit statement or a high-level business case for focusing on contract management and contract compliance, and also walk us through some methodologies to how to accomplish the objectives of contract lifecycle management and contract compliance. We'll then segue, and this will be a bit of a relay race. We just finished the Olympics, after all, where they ran those relay races without fumbling the baton, so we'll hope to do the same thing. And I'll transition into a discussion more around the technology landscape for CLM. So what are the components of a contract lifecycle management solution? And then a market overview. Who are the players? Where do they fit? And delve a little bit more deeply then into how organizations are actually deploying and utilizing contract lifecycle management tools, and how do we measure maturity as they go forward, and kind of with a forward-looking view, and in keeping with our theme today, it's not just about contract management as an isolated discipline or even application, but how does this become operationalized? How does contract management and compliance become operationalized and kind of embedded throughout source-to-pay processes overall? And our anchor leg will be run by Anders from QBE Insurance, who's going to give us that real-world view of a procurement leader and how he's utilizing contract lifecycle management, utilizing and operationalizing contract lifecycle management at QBE Insurance. So that's the overview for our session today. And just to set a little bit more context, I mentioned my name's Richard Waugh from Zycus. So Zycus, we're a software provider, a solution provider of integrated source-to-pay tools. So if you look across this pie, if you will, source-to-pay includes spend analytics, sourcing, contract lifecycle management, supplier management, procure-to-pay, and financial savings management at a high level. And we will touch on today how contract lifecycle management relates to the other components, how this wedge of the pie in gold that we're going to focus on today really forms an integrated whole altogether. So that's just a little bit about Zycus. I want to hand over to my colleague and partner from Nitor Partners, Ryan Wallachy, who'll tell us a little bit about Nitor Partners and then really set the stage for us to understand the fundamentals of contract compliance. Ryan.
Thanks, Richard. Good morning, everyone. Just first want to thank Nora and ISM for the opportunity, as well as Richard and Zycus to have us along for this journey this afternoon. A little bit about Nitor before we get into some of the content. Nitor started in 2003, and we are a procurement services firm. We're laser focused on the source-to-pay space. So as you'll see across the top there, there's 8 specific components that we define as a source-to-pay process. Some companies have 10, some have 7, but the point being is source-to-pay in itself is a very distinct and highly integrated process. And it relates to the topic of contract compliance we'll get into in a moment. Contract compliance exists in all of those things. So we want to talk about that today. From a delivery perspective, we have 3 business models. One, we have an advisory practice that focuses on helping clients plan, forecast, and roadmap activities to get from the point they are today to some future point, wherever that may be. We have a consulting practice, which is about execution. Once the plans are set, the goals are measurable, how do we get there? And ultimately, we have a BPO practice that is for clients that need longer-term support on very specific activities within that source-to-pay process. So I can leave you with 3 things about Nitor. One, we're a procurement services firm. 2, if you think about the life cycle of a transformation in procurement, it starts with defining where you want to go with our advisory practice. 2, then you have work to do. We support that through consulting. And then finally, with BPO, we support that from a scalability perspective. So we are truly side to side and top to bottom, a full-service procurement services firm. We work with a number of clients in every vertical, global, regional, national. Different complexities are presented at different verticals and different size companies. But the topic that we're going to talk about today, contract compliance, really has always been an important topic since we started in 2003. But I will say in the last 18 months, 2 years, has become an increasingly hotter topic in terms of how do I actually achieve it. So a couple of things I want to get out of the way before we get into the content is let's talk about the word compliance. Compliance has arguably a negative connotation, right? It's about getting people to do something that they weren't doing before. And so this story is not, contract compliance is not a story about suppliers sneaking in extra pennies or users going rogue and doing things they're not supposed to. Sure, both of those things exist, but like anything, the 99% of folks working at a company today are trying to do the right thing. The 99% of suppliers out there are trying to adhere and work with their clients and customers as per their contract and their relationship. So really the story here is more about how do we, in a very complex, increasingly digital world, find a way to work with suppliers where it doesn't require a small army effort to make sure that our users have the right information on which suppliers to use, and that our suppliers understand how to work with us. Because in some cases, we are highly complex global organizations. In others, we are highly complex, maybe smaller, but manufacturing organizations. Every organization has a certain complexity, and suppliers have to deal with that across their entire client base. So again, the story isn't really about making people do something they're not doing today. It's really more about getting people on the same page and being able to work in a seamless environment. So from Nitor's perspective, to define contract compliance, which, like anything in procurement, if you talk about savings or AP automation, the definitions tend to vary, but I want to be very specific here and talk about the entire source-to-pay process and its components. So what I mean by that is, if you think about upstream, typically folks will define that as analytics, category management, sourcing, and contract management. And that's really about identifying and trying to capture value, right? So doing your spend analytics, going to market with category strategies, and ultimately trying to get your supply base, your categories under specific contractual documents. And people have in the past said contract compliance is making sure that the contract is adhered to. Well, let's talk about downstream for a second. So downstream is your more transactional elements, right? How's your supplier performing for you? Are you sending them POs? Are they doing timesheets? Is it a work order? Is it based off of a contract item? How are we paying them? And ultimately, how are we measuring them with financial management and supplier performance? If you think about compliance more holistically, it really does start all the way in spend analytics, and it falls all the way through financial management. So most people focus on how do I make the contract management function also be a compliance function? Well, we're here today to talk about how compliance is measured through contract management, but every aspect in source to pay has a unique input to the ability to gain contract compliance. To get a little bit more specific, there are really 4 flavors of contract compliance. And I guess from a definitions perspective, to keep it simple, how we define it is it's an organization's ability to implement, track, and realize negotiated terms within an agreement. So let's talk about the 4 flavors. You have terms compliance, performance compliance, supplier compliance, and operational compliance. And we're going to focus most of today's discussion on operational compliance because that's really where you can, if you found value upstream, how you retain value is downstream through your transactions. But terms compliance are those things that are less transactional and more audit-driven, right? So insurance certificates, the indemnity clauses in a contract, the true auditability of the supplier themselves, be that financial audit or security audit, but how are you measuring or how are you ensuring that those things are happening on a regular basis, which is, again, part of the compliance to a contract. Second is performance compliance. Most suppliers have service level agreements and or customer satisfaction or CSAT scores that they have to live up to. And in our experience, those things are largely not measured on a regular basis. They are measured in a crisis. They're measured close to renewal, but they're not monitored and used as a leading indicator of supplier performance and corrective action. They're used as a negotiating tool or when something goes horribly wrong. Also, most suppliers at the Tier 1 level at least have quarterly business reviews they're responsible for, and that also goes back to the customer as well, is maintaining that discipline, that rigor to schedule, detail out how to review a supplier's performance. Supplier compliance, again, not looking at behaviors of people, but if you look at large global organizations, you have really 3 tiers. You have your global tier, you have your regional tier, and then your local tier. And in some environments, manufacturing is a good example. Some of these plants, refineries, manufacturing centers are located in very remote places. And so the supply in those remote places is driven in a local economy setting. So it's how do you, from a global perspective, tune into the requirements at a local level and drive supplier compliance to those suppliers which you wish to buy from. And the easiest example, which most people have, is that single source office supply supplier. But in reality, indirect and direct spend gets much more complex when you talk about MRO, inventory items, safety, equipment. those are the categories you want to focus the supplier compliance efforts on. And finally, again, where we'll spend most of our time this morning is operational compliance. How do you make sure that you pay for the service or product based on the contract? How do we ensure that we've set up the right buy channels for that supplier with the client? And ultimately, the terms around those things. Terms can be things like on-time delivery. They can be payment terms. They can be quality returns, on-time delivery, things like that. So that defines what contract compliance is. If we kind of talk about relative importance, because we started off by saying contract compliance has an element in each one of these 8 elements. And that's true. But ultimately, the hinge in the whole process is having contracts written in a way, from an upstream perspective, that you can transact against them. And then from a downstream perspective, being able to operationalize those contracts in a buy method. That could be as simple as a catalog, a punch-out, a service contract, inventory list, item master. There's lots of buy channels. But where we've seen things break down is where that contract function is disjointed from the upstream process. So if you think about folks who do category management, strategic sourcing, most organizations today aren't sourcing thinking about how will I transact with that supplier. They're thinking about all the things they're supposed to think about, the contract terms and conditions, the pricing, the SLAs. But they're not translating that discussion to, okay, now that we've agreed to this pricing, how do I get into the contract, how we intend to transact with that supplier? So that creates a little bit of disjointment downstream. And then if you go downstream and those things aren't there, guess what? Compliance is very difficult to measure. So the top 5, 6 problem areas that we see with our clients we help try to correct is, number 1, savings reporting. As an example, on a 10% save of a sourcing event or a category management event, typically savings have to be walked back 2 to 3% because that linkage doesn't exist. Price variance is introduced. So again, if you have a global contract with regional or local pricing tied to it, if you can't operationalize that easily, and easily is defined by can users find it, do users know where it is, you're going to have price variance because people will tend to source locally if they can't get the information that you should have for them. And our job gets harder as the years go by because 10 years ago, the idea of a boarding pass was like a Willy Wonka chocolate bar ticket. You had to go to the airport, you'd stand in the line, you watch the person key in 1,000 things, and then you got this really special hard board thing that you can get to an airplane on. Today, you do that on your phone. So the speed of the digital economy is speeding up, and us as users, when we work in our companies, we expect the same. Unfairly at this point, but we expect the same speed. And so if we can't provide speed and access to this content very quickly, you're going to have price variance. Credibility, of course. I mean, as we go around and we finish sourcing events and we have line of business sign off on a certain category event, our ability to present back true results is hampered if we don't have complete linkage between the upstream process and the downstream process. Negotiation, not a negotiation expert, but I think leverage is pretty important. If you had a list of criteria in a negotiation is to have as much leverage as you can. Often suppliers have more leverage than you because they have more information. They're selling products to you or services to you, so they have a lot of detail on how that product was delivered, how many issues they had or service, and without, again, that upstream and downstream linkage, that 360-degree view of your contract relationship, you're already at a disadvantage when you come to the table. Risk management, very similar to the negotiation leverage point. We've negotiated all these great risk management terms into our contracts, but if we're not measuring our suppliers proactively against those, what have we really achieved? And so you're at a disadvantage, again, being reactive. And finally, the point of making this entire slide is around procurement maturity. If you aren't connecting the process that a sourcing lead has to do with the process a buyer or an accounts payable person has to do, if that's not a conjoined process enabled by technology, you're going to have a leakage of contract compliance. This is probably my favorite slide. No offense to Anders or Richard, but this is very tangible. One of the things that we often help clients do is build a business case. Now, business case is another set of words that is, I think, misused. A business case is essentially a P&L. What executives want to see is, if I make this investment into what you're proposing, and that could be process improvement, could be technology, could be both, could be hiring people, what's my return on investment? Ultimately, that's the discussion, right? It's not how many bullets can you put in the slide that describe a better world. It's not how pretty are your PowerPoint slides. It's, if I'm going to give you $1 million to go fix something, what do I get for it? And so this list should help you if you're in that position. And number one is pricing. So this is a known benchmark across many of the benchmark organizations, as well as we've validated that through our customer base, through our implementations. But 1.5 to 3% of each addressable dollar is saved in addition to your sourcing savings when contract compliance exists, when that 8-element process is working in unison. That's driven from some of the things we talked about in the slide previously. So that price variance creeping in, some of the negotiation latency you have by not having all the information, you'll pick up 1.5 to 3% across your entire indirect spend by integrating that process. And so if you do some math in your head on 1% of your indirect spend, for those on the phone, it's probably a pretty big number, right? So that's a good place to start. Terms, this is purely a payment play. So if you have been following the fintech space or the payment space, which is creeping into our source-to-pay world every day, your ability to pay suppliers on the correct terms has an impact. It has a working capital benefit if you pay on time. It also can have a discount benefit if you pay early, or if you pay on longer terms like net 60, net 90, which is becoming, unfortunately, more the norm. Again, another working capital benefit. So another 0.5% can be saved on a working capital basis. What we find is some suppliers are contracted for net 30, net 45, but they're getting paid net 10, net 15. So one of the things that is easy to do is to ask your accounts payable department to run a terms file, terms payment report for the last year, match up against contracts as a sample size, and you can kind of get an idea of your variation on what did we agree contractually and what did we actually do. Those things are typically different. Discounts in that category as well. So a lot of companies either don't know they have a discount negotiated, and so it's not in their AP system to take advantage of, or their process is too slow to meet the terms. So traditional terms are 2% discount on 10 days, but most organizations can't get an invoice approved in 10 days, so you lose that benefit. So with automation, with linkage to contracts, those invoices that can take a discount can be prioritized within the AP department to pay them on the 8th day to take that discount. That's where you get the additional 0.25% lift. The supplier benefit is more the compliance aspect, right? Is making sure you have the right buying channel set up, they're communicated, they're trained, they know where to go to find those suppliers to buy their product or service versus buying outside the traditional channels. Performance and reporting kind of go together. It's the concept of having more real-time data, more data to look forward with instead of react to. So things like feeding scorecards with ratings based on operational metrics like service levels and delivery times. And then last but not least, on the benefit side is confidence. Being able to have that 10% saved from the previous slide and then coming back 6 months later and showing empirically through data, here's where we got it, or we achieved that benefit, and here's the data to prove it. That's a game changer for any procurement organization if you can walk back the actual results and match them dollar for dollar versus the other scenario where in every project there's already a default, hey, we're going to have to walk back 2 or 3% anyways because we don't have those processes in place. So I've been in the position of we can certainly help you do, or if you're on your way, go ahead. These are the top benefit areas. If you want to talk about contract compliance within your organization, or put together a business case presentation for executive leadership. These are the items that I would focus on in that discussion. So to sort of wrap up my section, there are some must-haves to build a compliance program. One is that upstream point again. As you source categories, services, and products, there has to be a focus on how am I going to transact with that supplier. I think in many organizations, the ones we work with, it's a missing concept of not only should you source the supplier or suppliers and source the commercial terms and the pricing, but there should also be language in there about how you expect them to transact with you over time. And that's going to create a linkage by itself. Second, think of the sourcing process as an output to an input to the contract process. So those either Six Sigma trained on the phone, inputs and outputs, right? So the output of a sourcing event should be the start of a contract. And so the start of a contract requires terms and conditions and pricing and supplier name. But the other thing, the other clause that should be in there, the other operational piece should be how do we intend to transact. So that's not a written clause. That's more that we have a catalog format. We have a punch-out agreement. We have a price list. Whatever the product or service category is, it's important to make that a key part of the negotiation process so that coming out of that event, it's a flip to be able to transact. You create the mechanism to push upstream results to downstream. So that's that linkage of once upstream has done its job of finding the supplier, building a contract with that supplier, and having them into all the right systems. Ultimately, how do we get that supplier to procurement operations to transact with? How do we communicate and implement to all of our users, hey, this supplier is our preferred or our sole source provider for these products or services? It's not an easy job. So downstream, buyers need to insert themselves in the conversation, and they need to do that in a way where they can represent those buying channels. So again, it can be very simple. We have catalog channels, we have punch-out channels, we have service entry sheet channels, we have time material channels, but it's the buyer's responsibility to make sure that the sourcing leaders understand by category what the preferred buying channel is, and they get that into the contract. And then finally, the point I'll make is scale. Compliance is not an easy task, especially the contracts. It's not something that you can implement just a process for and hope to get exponential benefit. I think it's a nice segue as we head into Richard's piece, but defining a business process for contract compliance that goes from upstream all the way through downstream, to me, is step one. Implementing that process for a small subset of your suppliers and making sure it works for your organization is step two. Step three is scale. And scale in our world often means technology, the ability to take a process, implement it into a system, and have automated checks and balances. So, Richard, hopefully that was a great segue over to you. So I'll pass the baton.
Absolutely great segue. Thanks so much, Ryan. I think you've really helped us understand why this is important and how to make a case for it and how to go about deploying contract lifecycle management. I want to then delve into the technology component of the solution a little more deeply, and first to kind of define what we mean when we say a contract lifecycle management solution. What are the components? At the highest level, a full contract lifecycle management solution should address both authoring and creating a searchable repository. So starting from the beginning, at the start of the authoring stage is drafting an agreement. And have some detailed bulleted lists here. I won't go through all these points, but just to highlight a few of the key functionalities that you should look for in kind of a state-of-the-art or best-of-breed contract lifecycle management solution. Number one, it's the ability to start within the tool with your own predefined template or to be able to import supplier paper into the process. The other thing that's becoming increasingly important, and I'll talk about in more depth in just a couple of minutes, is the ability to have your contract solution integrated with Microsoft Word. because that's firmly embedded with a lot of your users as sort of the go-to tool when it comes to especially drafting and authoring agreements. So we'll talk about the importance of that. But at the end of the day, drafting is about how do I sort of lock down this process to standardize the clauses and run that process according to a configurable but a standard workflow approval for those agreements. So moving from drafting into the review and negotiation stage, this is all about how do I maintain version control and an audit trail throughout. I'm dealing with potentially thousands or tens of thousands of documents, after all, each of which could have multiple iterations or versions. So the complexity is really beyond the scope of most of the sort of cobbled together tools that a lot of organizations find themselves dealing with. It really begs for a more sophisticated enterprise-wide view of contracts. And another important feature in this review and negotiation stage is, since contracts themselves can be so sort of voluminous, 50, 100 pages, not unheard of, in this review and approval cycle will be key executives who don't have the patience to wade through those details. So one key feature here is the ability to abstract the key terms of that contract into an executive summary view that's appropriate for that level of review and approval. And there are a lot of moving parts involved here. So oftentimes you may have different functional areas needing to review specific clauses, either from a technical or financial or legal standpoint. And efficiency is maximized by being able to conduct those reviews in parallel rather than going through a serial process which elongates that overall contract review cycle. When we get into the actual execution and approval standpoint, here it's increasingly about how do I ensure that the entire process flow is an online process instead of having disjointed or offline processes, especially at the very end of the contract execution cycle. So that means engaging reviewers and approvers where they happen to be, which means that with their mobile devices, being able to review and approve contracts, and going all the way through a digital signature, so an electronic signature versus a wet signature of putting pen to ink, having that process fully integrated as well. So that's kind of the authoring stage. Then the next stage, of course, is then aggregating those agreements into an enterprise-wide and searchable repository. So that means applying metadata tags to those agreements so that they're truly searchable across the enterprise and can provide that kind of reporting and analytics that you want. But not only searchable via those headers or metadata tags, if you will, but also full keyword search to be able to find a particular clause or term regardless of where it lives in the hierarchy of your agreements within that repository. Then it's about, having created that searchable repository, how do I track the actual performance against those agreements? So one key there is being able to match actual spend data to the contracts to track utilization and compliance, our theme for today, and also track performance from a service level agreement or a milestone standpoint, or making sure that you're accumulating the spend volume and capturing rebates that are baked into those contracts as well. And finally, it's about having the ability with this repository system to have automated alerts and reminders around things like expiry and renewal. So Ryan just gave us a lot of great data points for how to craft a business case for an investment in this type of technology. I've actually seen some organizations that justify the investment simply on this factor of being able to prevent auto-renewal of evergreen agreements that they didn't intend to convert to a renewal phase, but didn't have the visibility to prevent that from happening, creating an increased liability. So those are some of the key solution components to look for in a contract lifecycle management solution. In terms of what does the Marketscape look like, the landscape, Some of the most current research in this space and most comprehensive comes from the Forrester Wave on contract lifecycle management. So this was actually just published within the last 30 days. And I'll show you the results here in a second, but important to know what the criteria are for inclusion. So number one, they say it has to be a true CLM functionality, and if you parse the definition here, it really says it's not enough just to have a repository. It's the combination of a repository and full authoring capability that defines a true CLM solution. Second, they want to make sure that the providers that they evaluate have a relevant and meaningful market share as defined by 10 million or more in revenues. And third, that it's not simply a vertical solution for a single industry, but broad market coverage across. And here are the results. They really track, in the WAVE report, leaders as well as strong performers, challengers, et cetera. And it does include both what I would call integrated source-to-pay suite vendors such as Zycus, as well as some specialist point solutions contracts only included in the mix. And, of course, the evaluation criteria look at both strength of offering and the overall strategy. And, pleased to say that Zycus does appear here in the leaders quadrant or leaders wave in this case for contract lifecycle management. So just drilling a little bit more into this Forrester Wave report, one of the interesting things that they tracked is how are clients actually using the functionality here. And what emerges here is sort of a natural progression that by and large, most organizations actually start with the repository. So better than 90% are using the repository. The next stage, they sort of incorporate reporting and analytics from that repository. And as a third stage, move in sort of back upstream, if you will, a little bit in the process to automate the authoring stage as well, just a little bit better than 50%. And far fewer organizations that have taken sort of those final steps in this continuum of then integrating contract management with external systems like ERP, or that are leveraging the synergies between the contracts module within a source-to-pay suite and other modules like sourcing or procure-to-pay as an example. So following on those themes, kind of putting this in the context of a maturity model, what we see, of course, is most organizations starting with the archiving stage, adding the authoring component to really sort of move up that maturity curve and really simplify and make the processes more efficient. Then they get into monitoring and optimization, sort of as the ultimate stages of the evolution here, where you're actively and really proactively monitoring contract utilization and compliance, being able to ensure compliance to the items that Ryan mentioned, the terms compliance, the price compliance, et cetera, and then optimizing contracts by operationalizing those agreements across the source-to-pay process as well. So I'll delve into a couple of use cases that highlight the more advanced stages of this maturity model, and you see a quote here from the Forrester Wave report that really addresses one of these aspects that I referred to earlier, the need for contract lifecycle management solutions to be integrated with Microsoft Word, because many of the basics are sort of table stakes in terms of having a contract approval workflow and web-based authoring and searchable repositories, but the ability to leverage a tool that many users, especially the legal function, is already comfortable with, being Microsoft Word, is key to driving adoption and value with these solutions. So just to give you an example here, this is a plugin for Microsoft Word, and the way this works is the user, this is through a single sign-on, so the user doesn't have to log in separately, and they operate, and again, this is especially useful for the legal folks that are comfortable with Microsoft Word, they operate natively in a Word environment, but all of those changes that they're making are automatically reflected in the contract management tool. So you have one version of the truth. So it obviously provides a number of benefits in that area. Another example here from an optimization standpoint is having a dashboard view to be able to monitor performance. So in this dashboard, for example, I'm looking at expiration dates, I'm looking at category, contracts by category, at compliance, at a clause level. How often are we using our default versus the alternate or fallback clauses? Those are things the legal folks are very interested in. So I have this dashboard view, and I can customize it, and I can also export for reporting purposes in a variety of other formats. So the last example I'll share with you here now is, and use case is, how does contract lifecycle management truly become operationalized, so that it's this notion of the constant contract. It's not a static, but it's a dynamic living thing. With CLM in the center here, linking contract management to spend analytics gives me that visibility to actual contract utilization as well as compliance. There's a natural linkage between sourcing and contracting. So many organizations, as a best practice, would include their contract templates with the RFX, for example, and have all of that information flow at the conclusion of the sourcing event, pricing, terms, et cetera, directly into the contract. In terms of supplier management, having a single version of the truth also means suppliers only have to enter data once and have it auto-filled into contracts, as an example. And the linkage to supplier performance, scorecards, for example, helps to monitor and mitigate supply risk on an ongoing basis. One of the strongest ties across source to pay between contract management and procure to pay. And that means having those contracted line items and pricing visible to requisitioners at the point of ordering, so that you can really drive that compliance at that moment of truth when an individual is placing an order. It's also creating that funnel on the front end, making sure you're funneling request for contract initiation processes into the procurement department, and also incorporating the contracting process as part of your overall sourcing project management. So you might have a 7-step process, for example, for sourcing. Contract execution is one phase. How do I integrate that into an overall end-to-end project view? So that's my piece for the day. I want to turn it over to the Usain Bolt of our relay team, Anders Lillevek, to share with you a little bit of a perspective about QBE insurance and where he is on his journey towards contract compliance.
Thank you, Richard. I think I just skipped the slide, so I'm going to go back. So a little bit about QBE and the state of procurement starting in 2014, when the Global Procurement Group was really founded. So QBE is probably one of the largest companies that most of you have never heard of. We are a specialty insurance provider, a truly global company with head offices in Australia, but most of our premiums actually come outside of Australia. So if you look at our revenue base, it is split almost evenly between North America, Europe, and Australia at this point. And we are emerging in both Asia Pac and Latin America. We have about 17,000 colleagues around the world in 38 countries, and as earlier said, we have about $16 billion in annual premium written. So it's a good sizable company. And we organized our procurement group into 3 main spend buckets. Claim spend, which is obviously what we need to do, the activities that we need to perform in order to close a claim. Indirect procurement, which you guys all know, office supplies, consulting services, and so on, and then IT. And we found that those 3 buckets are largely a third, a third, a third. And we have presence in, most of our presence sits in North America, Australia, and Europe. So procurement was one of the first truly global functions within QBE. When we went to market to find a tool, we actually didn't look at contract management in isolation. We wanted a tool that could go end to end so that we could take advantage of some of the integration points that Richard and Ryan talked about earlier. We wanted to be able to look at things side by side. So, for example, look at our spend data and our contract data simultaneously. And really, once you can have all these components fully integrated, so for example, as you're managing our suppliers, it would make a lot more sense for us to be able to pull up the contract, look at the spend data, look at the open POs that are currently out there, so that when you sit down with the vendor, you have as much information about their relationship as they do, which is obviously key to managing the suppliers. A little bit about QBE's contracting world. When we started off, we had a contract database in one of our regions, and the rest of the contracts were managed in broom closets and filing cabinets, as we like to say. So it was very hard for us to be able to say what contracts do we have with vendor X, and what are the terms like, and what is our spend. So we undertook a very large project of gathering requirements from all of our different legal teams and building a contract repository. So once we picked Zycus, the decision was made to go with contracting first, because we felt that was really the key to making sure that we understood what outstanding commitments were. But in order for lawyers to use the tool, we needed to get them involved in solution design of the system itself. So as you can imagine, getting 7 legal teams globally to agree on anything is a challenge. But we undertook a good 3-month journey to come up with our requirement set. And out of that requirement set, we developed 10 types of agreements with 150 different subtypes. So a claims agreement, it would be one of the types, for example, and then they would have underwriter, they would have a claims handler, and so on and so forth. And as you can imagine, indirect has a bunch as well. And as part of the go-live process, we uploaded 7,000 contracts. Some came from the legacy system that has been retired, but the lion's share of the agreements came, as I said, from filing cabinets and broom closets, where we went through a process in which we taught the users how to scan and upload contracts, and then we guided them through the process of uploading the contracts and filling in the metadata. On the back end of the process, we built another process to make sure that the information that they put in was good. So as each contract was uploaded by the users, we would QA the files and the records to make sure the data is correctly filled in, all the fields are done. As you know, Sally's secretary in the remote office has 15 agreements she wants to upload. After the second or third, she gets kind of bored and she starts skipping fields. And of course, then the value of the contract repository becomes less and less. But what we have found is the uptake of the contract management system has been quite good. So not only do we store contracts there now, but we also store other things. As you can see, we have 22,000 documents in the system today, which is quite good. The other thing that we have done now that we have other tools up and running is we're doing some of the spend tracking data vis-a-vis the contract management system. So if we find vendors that are increasing in spend, we are automatically flagging those vendors to see if there is corresponding contract in the system. And if there is not, we will chase that user down who has been paying the vendor and make sure that we have a contract in place and that we can get it uploaded. And if not, we engage the sourcing team to, one, either move that supplier spend over to our preferred supplier or get a contract in place with those suppliers. We are in the journey of sort of crawl, walk, run. Most of our systems that we have implemented have been in place for a year, give or take, maybe 18 months at this point. So we are maturing the processes along the way in all the systems. But contract management was key for us to get things going. And now we have over 300 users globally using the contract management system every day. A little bit about the solution footprint that we deployed at QBE. So we are now using all of the solutions that you can see in blue. So first and foremost, contract management. We implemented that first. We went live on January 1st, 2015. And during 2015, we then launched spend analytics, e-sourcing, and financial savings tracking. The thing that is not listed here is it is the iManage piece that we're currently deploying for all of our project management. And we are in the midst of deploying supplier management platform right now into the suite of tools. We are implementing a third-party procure-to-pay system, but we are pursuing the implementation and integration with the Zycus suite so that we can really have an end-to-end view of all of our supply-related information in one place. All in all, it's a journey for those of you who are moving ahead with this. It's really what Ryan said earlier. You need to have the end goal in mind. There's a lot of configuration. There's a lot of things you have to decide before you start the journey. And I think more than anything, being at QBE and having done this a few different times, it was very important to have the right people on the bus as you start the journey, because there are some things that you didn't think of because you haven't done this before, or you thought you've done it before, but the landscape has changed. So maybe we'll get into some of the Q&A stuff later on, but I would strongly recommend that you start this process with the end goal in mind, because if you don't know where you're going, any way it's going to get you there. So with that, I will leave it over to Q&A, I think.
Well, great. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you all very much for great information, super great presentation. We've got quite a few questions, and we've got about 8 minutes to answer them. So I'm going to go to kind of a foundational question that we've had some common themes about. How do you develop a baseline on how high or low your compliance rate is today? Give us a little bit more information about how to get your arms around that information.
No, that's a really great question. I think there's a scientific way, and then there's more practical way. So the scientific way is for those of you that have access to resources or training around stats or statistics or black belt type analysis. You can take a subset of suppliers and invoices and do some analysis against contracts, right? So you take a sample size of your top 20%, sample size of your middle 20%, and then some suppliers from your bottom 60% of your supply base, and try to make some statistical analysis of overall, this is kind of our compliance area. That's the more scientific, kind of time-intensive way to go about it. The more practical way is to do with less statistical math, but take a sample size of your top 20 suppliers, because they should make up a significant portion of your spend, and do some analysis just on those suppliers. So a bit of an audit history of what does our contract say, what did we pay last year at the unit level, and did we see any variance? And so you can kind of set a bit of a baseline, although it's somewhat assumptive, but at least you have some baseline to say, at least across our top suppliers, our compliance rate was X percent. I think the real practical way, which no one does, but to get to the true answer is you'd have to hire an army of people to do an audit of all your suppliers for all the transactions for an entire year. So we're not going to do that. And that's why I offer a scientific way. It takes a little bit longer, probably a little bit more specific. And then there's the more practical way of doing a sample size study to get a baseline of with some assumptions around it of what your percent compliance would be today.
Right. We've got a couple of questions that really go to the same issue. One's from someone who works for a city government, another for somebody who works in a small company of less than 300 employees. I mean, if you're not a billion-dollar company and your board or your city government is not going to want to invest in a formal contract monitoring system, what are some just 2 or 3 good key practices that could be put into place in smaller systems like that using some of the theories that you've got here?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So let's talk about process. So if you go back to the comment around integrating the idea of contract compliance more upstream, I think in smaller organizations or in those organizations that are less interested in investments in technology, think about your sourcing process. I'll give you a real example. So you source a category for products. Traditionally, that result is a list of products with a SKU number and a price, and maybe some geographical nuance to that. In tomorrow's world, what I would do in those situations is implement a format, again, whether that's a catalog format, a punch-out catalog format, a price sheet, something that your downstream process can consume and use, and put that back on the supplier. And say part of our contract, part of the sourcing event is I need you to fill in the template for pricing in this way. And if you think about it, if that's already done for you, you can take that out of the sourcing event, append it to the contract, and automatically push it to your operational procurement team to implement in the intranet or however you guys would transact if technology is non-existent. I think that's one really good way to think about it, is push as much upstream is number one and push as much to the supplier, number two. And I think the second point I'll stop there, is around contract scope. We all have that big tail spend view. Regardless of how many suppliers you have or don't have, you're going to spend 80% of your funds with 20% of your suppliers. So I'd focus on them first. If you can get those locked down into a contract compliance methodology, you've probably done your job in trying to optimize contract compliance without more automation.
Great. And this question is for Anders, but also for the rest of you as well. From start to finish, what's the time frame? How long has the process taken to put into place at the Anders organization? But typically, what's the time frame for other types of organizations as well?
So I can cover that off. So I think at QBE we kind of spent a lot of time developing our requirement set before we actually got the contract signed with Zycus to move things forward. So we hired NITO partners to help us do a deep dive, and we spent probably 3 months doing a bottoms-up analysis of all the contracts we had out there, what the fields were, what the common fields were, in order to develop that contract repository. Because we knew that we needed to configure the contract management tool to meet our needs. It couldn't be generic, something we just threw in and asked the lawyers to start using it, because that would certainly not be a success. So we spent 3 months developing requirements before we actually engaged with the Zycus implementation team. And I'm going to let Richard defend the timeline here. But we turned over the requirements to Zycus in just before Thanksgiving on 2014, which is in America is the last week of November. And they developed the system for us to start testing in about 3 weeks. So about the middle of December, we started testing. We went through 2 rounds of testing before we published the production environment on, like I said, on January 1st, 2015. So that's the technology part of it. Then we obviously did a large push globally. So we trained some 100 users in the division that they are in. So I have a global team that I engaged with training materials, and I would say that before the noise sort of died down, it probably took 6 months to get everybody comfortable using the tool. Entering contracts, searching for contracts, not sort of getting jammed up in the process. I mean, any change is difficult, but I think it's the transition they're afraid of or they're adverse to. Once the change has been implemented, it's quite successful, and I would say that's the case here as well. And now we have people asking for how can we use this in a different way rather than us pushing it down their throats, right?
Super. Thanks very much. Well, we're almost done. We're almost at the hour, and I need to go through a few final comments. But I'd like to thank all 3 of our fabulous speakers for sharing their expertise and their time. Certainly would like to thank Zycus for once again sponsoring an excellent event and bringing some great knowledge to the marketplace. We've got a lot of questions, and we will address those offline, including some very specific technical questions. For those of you that had questions about benchmarking of data available from ISM, CAPS research does have some benchmarks that are available to the public, and I would encourage you to go to the CAPS Research, capsresearch.org website for those types of benchmarks. So for now, I'd like to thank everyone again for participating, including all of our participants. Attendees of this event will receive an email within the next 24 hours thanking them for their attendance, as well as giving you a link to a CEH certificate for your hour and also to the archive of today's event. There is a short survey at the end of this program, I believe, so we thank you for spending some time on that. And once again, thanks to all of our speakers, and everybody have a great day.